First of all, working for Wexler was a gas. He's such an icon. And he thought Steve Winwood would be an interesting duet with Etta James. And it was interesting. As a matter of fact, we did Nighttime is the Right Time, because the nighttime is the right time to be with the one you love. And in the middle of, she goes, baby! And that's in one ear. And then Steve Winwood comes in and goes, baby! And I went, I can hardly tell the difference between Etta James and Steve Winwood, and their voices blended great. And so that was a fun day in the studio to have both of them in my head.
Muscle Shoals swamper Will McFarlane talks and plays Bonnie Raitt, Steve Winwood, and Johnnie Adams with signature compact licks in Soul Country number 13. I'm Rick Stewart, a filmmaking DJ in my 5th decade of action, adding some real-life podcasts to get deeper into soul country.
Good God!
Where we corral Americana with a groove, curated for classic rock and soul fans. Listen in as we revitalize our cultural roots in westerns, blues, and variety. Now, a word from our sponsor. Contact Ace Production for digital marketing, content strategy, and YouTube and podcast production to drive views, engagement, and sales. If you need original and effective content, get Ace. Well, Will unpacked a strat and held forth on Muscle Shoals history and playing with soul.
I was vastly influenced by what was on the radio. And of course, to me, between 1964 and 1972, that was the greatest radio because everything was mixed in together. You'd hear Sam and Dave, and then you might hear the Lovin' Spoonful, and then you'd hear some pop thing like the Archies, and then you'd hear Sunshine of Your Love, and everything was just all mixed in. And so I listened to everything, and I never was really a wide open. I never walked out on stage. I was always the rhythm guitar player and singer. And so I played the guitar for 7 years before I actually took a solo on stage. I just loved R&B, Soul Man, Hold On, I'm Coming, Knock on Wood. That was the stuff that I just fell in love with. We learned licks like that. And I didn't even know what they were at the time. But now, Cropper was a big influence. All the rhythm guys, the guys who did little opening statements, were the ones I always wanted to know about. And but as I said, R&B, I loved real country. When I was a teenager, I got Merle Haggard live in Muskogee, Oklahoma. And Roy Nichols just, took real simple. Just simple, melodic. And I heard that quote from Chet Atkins. He said, "You'll never go wrong playing the melody." So guys like Roy Nichols were a big influence. And that was straight gut bucket country, But I loved bands like Poco when they came out. I loved the country influence. I'm a Texan by heritage.
Biggest artists in rock history are really equally based on country as much as blues.
Oh yeah.
And so George Harrison and the Beatles is like case in point. Chet Atkins, you just said never go bad restating the melody. George stays really close to that a lot of times and just throws on one little variation and that's the solo and you went, wow, that was amazing.
I'm a huge fan of those guys, the simple, serve the tune. I became a session guy because primarily I wasn't one of those guys who walked out on stage and took 5-minute solos. I was the guy who'd do maybe a little turnaround coming out of the bridge, And so, that's what attracted my ear was the combination of them all. Well, you before this interview, we were talking about the band, and they just blew me away. And it seemed to make sense to me because it was country, but it was not gut bucket country. It was just, you heard the influence, you heard the blues influences, you heard the soul influences and rock and roll influences and country. They just sort of captured it all. And so the band, and by the time I was 19, the band Ry Cooder,
Jesse Ed Davis.
Freshman weekend at the university I went to very briefly in 1969, brought in Taj Mahal with Jesse Ed Davis on guitar. And it changed my life because I was a little shy and didn't want to trust that I could go out and, take a long extended solo like, Wheels of Fire or something like that. But Jesse Ed would just, just soulful, simple stuff. And I stole so much from Jesse Ed Davis. One time I was doing a session with Roger Hawkins, and he's still my favorite guy I was ever in headphones with, that rhythm section with Roger Hawkins and David Hood and Clayton Ivey mostly. It was the four of us did all that Malaco stuff or a lot of Malaco stuff. And Roger, we were playing just a simple demo one day, and I was back in the booth playing acoustic guitar. He was in the next booth, and just every, 16 bars, he'd just do just a little lift on the, and I started realizing that's what he's doing, and I would go nothing special, and it sounded so good that day. It was just a little fairy dust on the track, And Roger, who didn't compliment much, one of his philosophies was, if you're here, it's because we like what you do. We shouldn't have to tell you you're great all day long, But he looked at me and he said, "You're playing great today." And I was so confident, I turned to him and I just said, "I'm just listening to you." And he said, "Good players are good listeners." And I still love that, because in a day and age where you can be one soul and cut and paste and you can program a lot of things, unless you're Stevie Wonder, one soul isn't usually nearly as interesting to me as four souls out on the floor and the keyboard player does something and it's a conversation. You go, "Oh, you go in there, or I'll come over there with you." And to have enough under your hood to respond to the other players in the room because you're listening. You're not just sitting there thinking, "I'm going to get this in on this track." You're listening to what everybody else on the floor is saying. And I love being in headphones with 3 or 4 other guys.
What about mistakes? Do they get incorporated into the final product as a useful way?
Every now and then we'll refer to a happy mistake. Like you'll be listening to a playback and at first you think, "I got there a little early." But 2 or 3 playbacks into it, you go, I like it. And pretty soon you might send a guy back out on the floor to do it with you or whatever. There are times where, and the jazz guys say, if you make a mistake, just do it again and then act like you meant it. Every now and then you can not quite pull off what you were going for, but you listen back to it and you go, I don't mind that at all. That was sort of interesting. An interesting compensation when I blew it.
You're playing the Telecaster most of the time, and today it looks like a Strat.
It is.
But
yeah.
How do you end up on the Telecaster? What does it have to offer, would you say?
Telecasters, a Strat looks at you with grace. It almost says, "You want to play me? Please pick me up." It's more like a dog. Pet me, like. It's just very sweet to me. You can overdrive anything. Tellies, if you don't articulate them well, to me, they hurt people, I'm being humorous, but they're so, you can mix a telly down, put it at 830 in the track and mix it down to 1 dB and you'll still feel it. It just somehow occupies frequencies and places that it's alone. And so they're great for cutting tracks. You can be at very low volume. Most of the chimps or chinks that I've done, like on soul records, have been on a Telecaster because it's just the classic tune. But it's also, chicken picking country. But then again, Al McKay and Earth, Wind and Fire played a Telecaster. They're great rhythm guitars.
You can do some jazzy stuff too.
The front pickup is jazzy. I did Last $2 for Johnnie Taylor on the front pickup of a Telecaster. Last $2.
Take me from when you're joining Bonnie Raitt in those years to come into Muscle Shoals.
Well, I did the Late for the Sky tour, and then she kept me around for 5 more years, and we just went all over the world. We did, Montreux, and played the Hammersmith Odeon, and I think I've been to every state but Alaska, and just went all over the world with her. And it was a great. We were doing shows with Little Feat and Tom Waits and, just Buddy Guy and Muddy Waters. And it was just, I was 22 years old, from 22 to 26 with Bonnie. And just, you can imagine the schooling, it's like apprenticing under a master, you know. And Bonnie's voice was so beautiful. You didn't want to upset it. You didn't want her to go, you know, love has no pride, and you go, you know, and just distract from her amazing vocal quality. And so it was a great way to learn. Bonnie's a brand too, like a Delbert or people like that, that if they do country, it's Delbert. If Bonnie, you know, people will say, is she country? And I go, which country? You know, I mean, she could sing a country, she could sing Louise, but she could sing, you know, Sugar Mama. Rock and roll, R&B, blues, it didn't matter. It was all Bonnie. She just was a brand. And so I learned so many different styles and moved out to LA ultimately, and was doing sessions, and Bonnie got off the road for a year, and I went out with the Pointer Sisters. Just I was a hired gun. And I wasn't an A-team guy, but I was a guy they might call if they couldn't get James Burton, whatever, because they knew I had a Telecaster. And so I played on some of the Urban Cowboy soundtrack, and I did other things. And would go to the Troubadour on Monday nights and just hang with the musicians. And Duncan Cameron was in the Amazing Rhythm Aces at the time and had just done a record in Muscle Shoals. He said, I want to introduce you to somebody. And ultimately it led to meeting Jimmy Johnson of the Muscle Shoals Rhythm Section. And they took me to meet him at a hotel, Sunset Marquee. And he said, well, play me something. And so I played him a song I'd written. And he said, well, play me something I don't like. He said, I'd love to demo that. Would you come to Muscle Shoals? And I went, God, I'd love to. Because I knew my actual first real awareness of Muscle Shoals, it all came together in about 72. The Bealtitudes album came out by the Staple Singers with I'll Take You There and Respect Yourself on it. And it just became a morning album for me. Like we were waking up as a band and putting on an album. And that was one of the ones we woke up to for a while. First time I ever saw pictures of the guys and just realized, wow, you know, I mean, it's this bunch of white guys in Alabama making some of the best R&B in the world. And it just drew me to that. So I already knew about Muscle Shoals. And when they introduced me to Jimmy, he said, would you like to come down here? I was like, well, heck yeah. I drove down here, spent 3 days. They put a rhythm section together for my demos. It was Roger and David and Clayton and Mac McAnally and Duncan Cameron and Randy McCormick. And I just had a great time. I wasn't in a traffic jam for 3 days. And flew back to LA. And the first time I sat in traffic for an hour and a half to go 12 miles, I just said, this is not living. And called Jimmy, said, we'd love to have you down here. And I moved to Alabama in 1980. And he brought me in. He started stuff. He was starting to really want to be on the other side of the glass, Jimmy. And he needed a sort of an alter ego. And he really showed, I mean, I'd done session work and Bonnie Raitt records and some of the movie theme stuff, but he really showed me how to get things on tape. He really did. He just was patient with me. Let's get this done. Let's double that. Use a thin pick for that brush stroke. Let's do this. Let's do that. And just really brought me into the things he produced and had me out on the floor and really mentored me in a lot of ways. And I'll be forever thankful. You know, to me, Muscle Shoals was in some ways very famous, or its sound was black artist, white band, that the combination was great. And if you talk to Dan Penn and people like that were around at the time, and they say, you know, when Martin Luther King was assassinated and it became a cultural, serious, you know, wrench in the gears, and all of a sudden a black artist might walk in and see a white band and not want to work that day. And a lot of times, even stylistically, you'll notice a lot of the black music became more P-funk or more, you know, moved towards rap, and white got just a little whiter.
Yeah, more metal in the end.
Yeah, more metal at the end. It became, which is very mathematical to me. It was like Phrygian mode, 16th notes at 220. And so the country soul, you know, I've backed up, you know, I've been on stage with Percy Sledge, who's you know, When a Man Loves a Woman to me is just as classic country soul as there is. You know, it's an obvious Southern thing. To me, the South, maybe it's the heat, maybe it's the humidity, but there's a tempo down here that's just back in the pocket that, and even I'd ask Little Milton, I'd say, who'd you really listen to? He'd say, well, the only radio station we got was WSM. You know, he was listening to country music, trying to bend strings like pedal steels and things like that. All the black guys were listening to country music, and country guys were listening to blues, and there's a wonderful combination down here in the South, more than almost any place in the country, because I've lived in Boston, New York, and LA, and DC, and they all have a thing, you know. It's almost like you can say, or New Orleans, for example. But I really think it's a Southern thing, that country soul, and it's about my favorite kind of music to play.
But up until the end, I'm gonna take all I can take.
They used to talk about the fatback rhythm, which I think was some of that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that was maybe circa 1970. That was all over the place.
Well, remember the live, King Curtis live at the Fillmore, where Bernard Purdie comes in with that drum, and he said, now I need about a half pound of fatback soul, and that Bernard Purdie drum intro that I put the needle back on about 50 times one day, just laughing. And now I've gotten to play with Bernard a lot and become friends, and he's just a pleasure to know. But yeah, I think of fatback drumming as that, you know, you listen to Roger Hawkins on.
Is that officially behind a beat? Or is that like, or a half beat?
Well, you know what? I heard some of the early Stax Volt stuff, they cut without headphones. So if you're 20 feet away from the drummer, that's about 15, 20 milliseconds of, you know, you're listening to the drums at the speed of sound. When you're in headphones, you're listening at the speed of light, electricity. So if you're 20 milliseconds behind the drummer,
Or you're watching it, yeah.
You're watching a snare hit, but you're going, jang, and you might just flam with it a little. You might just pull it back just a little. And you listen to Mustang Sally that was cut here. That's Roger. You know, and it's almost all bands out in the world, you know, they play it too fast. But when you listen to it, having sat next to Roger for 20 years and been in headphones with him, Roger's hi-hat was a metronome. His bass drum was a metronome. But where he dropped his snare, he felt like he was on it. But his natural, he couldn't even be objective about it. His natural thing was just a little back. He just hold it back, and that's what feels so good. There's a heartbeat in there. There's a, you know, and so Al Jackson had the same thing, you know, at Stax Volt. And to me, Al Jackson and Roger Hawkins were the two best pure country soul drummers.
Now, did you ever end up recording with Malaco down in Jackson, or they came up here? I mean,
No.
How would you describe that environment? Do you feel a different vibe being down there?
I did feel a different vibe down here, you know. I mean, Muscle Shoals sound was, you know, we had the big Neve console, and it was sounded warm and fat. We're in like a really modern room, you know, and it was just a pleasure to play there. Jackson was a little funkier at the time, you know, your little funky little drum booth you put in. We were out on the floor by then. We had the drums out on the floor, and we're getting a lot of sort of natural leakage, and down in Jackson, you know, the drums are back in a booth again, and we cut a bunch of stuff down in Jackson, and I think I can sort of tell the difference for some reason.
We had Bobby Rush in season 1. He's based down there.
Yeah. Yeah, I did tracks for Bobby Rush. And I sort of thought of ourselves as like a track factory. Like Wolf would come up here from Malaco, from Jackson, and he'd say, okay, we're going to cut 25 tracks in the next 4 days. And 6 of them are for Bobby Bland, and 2 of them are for Dorothy Moore, and 1's for Bobby Rush, 2 for Artie White, or 5 for Johnnie Taylor. And I'm not even sure sometimes what records I'm on, if you really want to know. We just cut tracks. And sometimes the artist would show up, like we might cut 3 or 4 tracks, and Johnnie Taylor come in. And one of my favorite things I ever heard out on the floor is he said, would you go put a scratch vocal on this last one? He goes, I don't do scratch vocals. And just goes out and hits a master. You know, he's just such a good singer. But so I'm not even sure what records I'm on, but
You play a little bit of that sound or that era?
Something like Last $2, you know, was like, you know, and I'd go, just real straight blues kind of, things. And then when you go, Lady at the Casino, dun, 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 just a little tic-tac kind of little rhythm stuff. Just real simple.
So those phrases are kind of like call and response too, right? You have like one that opens it up and one that kind of
he'd go da 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 da. And and a lot of times I just sort of be in the hole after the vocal, if they wanted that, you just sort of play, shoot from the hip and hope it lands,
How did New Orleans and Louisiana music arrive in your scene, and how do you feel about that?
As I said, early in my young days, my buddy Paul, who had the record collection, turned me on to the meters. And that was Alan Toussaint producing stuff. We're listening to Working in a Coal Mine and Yaya. And the Lee Dorsey album, Yes We Can, was a major morning record for us too. Those early meters records, Cabbage Alley. Well, I loved everything that came out of New Orleans. And with Bonnie, we played the Jazz Fest a couple of times back in the day. And I would just be, when I was off stage, I was in the gospel tent, which was amazing. It still smokes down there, or going to the blues tent or whatever I saw, the wild Chapatulas and the meters. And Alan Toussaint sat in with us one time, and I went down to Tipitina's, and George Porter and Alan Toussaint sat in with the band. They asked me up, and then Bonnie cut What Do You Want the Girl to Do, or What Do You Want the Boy to Do, as Bonnie did it. But knowing that stuff and being on stage with Alan Toussaint and him looking at me going, what do you want the boy to do? And I went, and just kicked it off, and getting to jam with George Porter and Alan Toussaint was just real high points. I mean, I loved that stuff. They were definitely an influence. And also all that the Professor Longhair kind of piano playing that Clayton Ivey does so well, that
coming up out of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
The Professor Longhair.
It has a rumba thing to it. And there's a lot of sort of rumba stuff. I just sat in on the Sandy Beaches cruise, the Delbert cruise. I just sat in with Wayne Toops. And they kick into that kind of stuff. With squeeze box. And just blow you off the stage. I mean, just amazing.
Zydeco could be a heavy blues channel too.
Very much so. You can take a blues solo to almost any Zydeco tune. And they say for I'll Take You There, they had just heard reggae, really. They were just being turned on to reggae. And so they had that. And it's not pure reggae. They're not going. You hear the reggae influence. And in a lot of ways, my playing and their playing, we never really lived there. We just really enjoyed visiting. It's like we enjoy the influence. And if you've got a sort of a reggae influence, but you're playing blues, or you've got a country influence, but you're doing little background chimps on the guitar that are sort of but it's a country song, and I love the crossover. I love mixing and blending.
New Orleans was the original place that was like that. It was the melting pot of
because they might be playing even jazz bands might jam on something like Sissy Strut, which is just, to me, it's a New Orleans funk, but you'll hear Branford Marsalis jam on it or something and just take an outside jazz solo, on a track that's pretty inside, I mean, it's very simple and basic, but all the jazz guys love playing funk, just, you have plenty of permission to get as outside as you want. I like horn parts. I like Mr. Pitiful, if we're going, the horns go, but also, I divide chords into two notes mostly when I'm in the studio. So if you're in that rhythm going, and you're just sort of fooling around with, little two stops, and not getting in the way of the vocal or the song, but just snapping it around.
Let's talk about some of the records I saw that you played on. Etta James.
Yeah, well, first of all, working for Wexler was a gas. He's such an icon, and he brought our rhythm section in with Roger and David and Clayton, and we cut a couple of tracks with him. And then he kept me around for a couple of days to overdub on some of the other tracks that were cut by, Steve Cropper and Willie Weeks, and there was another rhythm section there. And I loved having Etta. And one of the cool things about some of the tracks I cut with Etta was he thought Steve Winwood would be an interesting duet with Etta James. And it was interesting. As a matter of fact, we did Nighttime is the Right Time, because the nighttime is the right time to be with the one you love. And in the middle of, she goes, baby, and that's in one ear. And then Steve Winwood comes in and goes, baby. And I went, I can hardly tell the difference between Etta James and Steve Winwood, and their voices blended great. And so that was a fun day in the studio to have both of them in my head. Billy Preston was so much, people think of him as, a funk guy, but he could sit in with Oscar Peterson. I mean, Billy Preston.
And he brought the countryside.
He did too.
Bobby Blue Bland, there's another name that really fits this soul country milieu.
I love Bobby, and it's a funny story that when I first met him, he had Wayne Bennett in his band, for 30 years or whatever, and Wayne had just passed, and he came to Muscle Shoals Sound to do the next record after Wayne had passed. And they were introducing him around, and this is Roger, and this is David, and there's your guitar player, Will McFarlane. I think I was tuning this guitar. And he goes, that's a rock guitar. And I went, well, Buddy Guy plays one. He goes, that's what I mean. So I cut the whole record with a 335 because I figured he wanted to see F-holes in it. And I missed my fenders, on the basic tracks. So we got along great. We did so much stuff together, and he was amazing to hear in your headphones. And, they don't talk about it much, but Bobby didn't read in time real well. And I don't want to blow a cover, but Bob Wilson or somebody like that might be prompting him. And you go, I've got double trouble. And you hear Bobby go, I got double trouble. And they go, between my woman and my wife. Between my woman and, he would just answer with soul right behind, just getting prompted the lyrics. And just amazing to watch. Oh, we did members only. We did stuff that was 3-chord songs, but we did Memphis Monday Morning that was like almost just big band jazz. Like he could do anything.
Little Milton's also in that bag, though, the country soul country. What was working with Little Milton?
As I told you, Little Milton and I got along. He requested me at times. Where is it? And actually, I remember one time they wanted him to cut a Bee Gees song that was "You Don't Know What It's Like to Love Somebody." So Little Milton does a version of it, but he had never heard the song, so they sent me out on the mic to do a rough vocal for him. So Milton and I got along great, and he's the one I said, "Who'd you really listen to?" And he said country. He had a country radio station that they caught the skip on, and T-Bone Walker. But I loved Little Milton. As a matter of fact, he let me play his guitar on one of the tracks, and it was just this old 59 345. They'd been refretted so many times they were almost down on the truss rod. And I was playing it and it's light, and it just sang. It was just a great guitar. And I said, Milton, I hope you live till you're 120, but I'll be 110. I'd like to be in your will. He went, get in line, son. But we shot pool together and had a great time together. He, at one point, to me, was sort of the elder statesman of that whole genre. He was, he just carried a torch in a lot of ways for, the old country soul. Well, and also, I was huge when I saw Taj Mahal that first weekend. Taj did, stuff like, got a bird, wanna whistle, baby got a bird, my honey got a bird, will sing. Baby got a bird, my honey got a bird, will sing. It's just Mississippi John Hurt kind of finger playing, but it's country, and it's
Yeah, you don't need a band when you can do it all.
No, he just does it all. You know, he sits there, finger picks, and he's an ethnomusicologist, so he knows every style of everything. And blend, talk about a blend. You know, like a Taj Mahal record might have everything from, you know, Latin, Caribbean to 8 tubas. You know?
And very well preserved in that Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus with Jesse Ed Davis.
Ain't that a lot of love for two hearts to have and hold? Yeah, Taj with Jesse Ed Davis was, at that point, one of the most influential. I just never heard anything like them. And it was all totally roots-based, and it covered a lot of ground, and they played for a couple of hours, and I was 17 years old, and just like, and then at 19, he did a guitar clinic at a folk festival in DC, in the DC area at Wolf Trap. And I just sat at his feet, and he would just go, you know, Elmo James play 12 bars, and Big Bill Brunzian play 12 bars. And then he opened for Bonnie one time and came out on stage with us. And I got to stand next to him and just feel how incredibly musical and soulful that dude is. I'm a big fan. You know, about half of every Bob Seger's album for about 10 years was done down here. And you can hear the influence.
Put your hand on your hip, let your backbone slip. Do the wild you say, my little Lucy. Ow! Let's sing it, won't you do it? Here we go. Na 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 na, na 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 na.
History of Muscle Shoals' sort of most noted guitar players. And I put down Dwayne Allman and Jimmy and Pete Carr and Eddie Hinton, and I put Wayne Perkins and Leonard Skinner in there.
You might as well.
Was there a torch being handed off or an evolution of a style? Or?
Well, yeah, when I first did move here, you know, Jimmy would say, can you twin this? Can you take a twin? Because Pete Carr was so quick at doing twins. And of course, Dwayne did that with the Allman Brothers. And that was one of the mentalities that I had to get on my game with. I can't really do it here, but if I do, you know, let's say something like then the twin would, you know, I play a harmony with it, and the two of them together sound like, except it's two guys really doing it, and so it's
off by a little.
You'll hear, you know, like on Jessica, you know, one guy's going. Whatever, and one guy's going something like that, or whatever. You know, and there's all three parts there, and you know, you get three guitar players that doing all three parts, and that's twin stuff. You know, that's what I call twinning. And Pete Carr did that great. He did the Tonight's the Night with Rod Stewart, that twin guitar stuff at the end. Or whatever, you know, he'd go, and then the next one, or whatever, you know, and that, you know, you can hear Pete doing that.
Leonard Skinner, so they were in and out of town in their earliest days, and then they came back and recorded some in the mid-'70s.
Yeah, and by then Huey was in the band, Huey Thomason from the Outlaws, but they still had Leon and Billy Powell and Gary Rossington. I was hanging around some of those sessions, you know.
How would you describe where Skinner had taken their guitar playing versus where the Allman Brothers had it? Which apart also that the Allman Brothers style Dwayne thinks of while he's here in Muscle Shoals on the Wilson Pickett and in the Boz Scaggs era, like 68-ish, before they get that together.
I've heard a lot of people consider the end of Hey Jude as the beginning of Southern rock.
Flipping the dial now to the TV set, what are some of your favorite Westerns of all time?
Well, I know it's a modern one, but I love Silverado. I just love Silverado. I love Danny in that. I love Kevin Kline. That when he's in jail and they're going to hang him the next morning, and he goes, is so-and-so alive? And he goes, yeah, I made it out by the skin of his teeth or something like that. And he goes, lucky. And he goes, yeah, everything's working out just fine. He's going to get hung in the morning. You know, Silverado's great, but I love Fistful of Dollars just watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly channel surfing the other day.
Yeah, that's the higher budget one.
Yeah, the higher budget one. Just watched it the other day. Of course, Outlaw Josie Wales. Man, that's dark. And I love John Wayne. I love him and Maureen O'Hara together.
Those are really old ones.
Yeah, so I really liked McClintock and.
Yeah, that was towards the end of the era. Yeah,
it was the end of the era, but I, that's what I grew up. That was my age group, and I love Stagecoach. I love some of the early stuff. I love the Searchers. He's a little dark in that too, but
those are all-time masterpiece. John Ford.
The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance was great. Jimmy Stewart was great in that.
Yeah, I've been getting into the Jimmy Stewart early mid-50s with Anthony Mann. So there was Naked Spur and Bend of the River, and but Anthony Mann,
Winchester 70.
Yeah, he could do the black and whites like nobody out there.
I've become part of a group with John Cowan and Andrea Zahn, who are calling themselves the Herculeons. And it's like electric bluegrass, but it's not fast bluegrass. It's really good songs and really interesting. I went to see them and sat in when they had Dan Penn as their guest artist. And I'm going to do a little playing with them. But just seeing them when I first saw them, their singing was so good, really good. I love the Mavericks too. I love Raul singing. He was just such a crooner. And really like them. I've always loved Delbert McClinton. Always. I just saw Bonnie again, and she had invited me out. I did some of the encore with her, and she's still singing so well. I mean, just killer band. I mean, she's great. She may be the best interpretive singer of my generation.
Looking towards the future and legacy, how would you like to be remembered?
Well, I'd like to be remembered as somebody who was easy to get along with when we cut tracks that they liked having around. And also just somebody who served the song, somebody who, learned his craft and listened well and tried to do something that would be memorable, It's a hard thing to think about, I think the studio family is a really interesting family of people. We sort of all know what each other does, and we all listen to each other and find out who played on. From the very beginning, when you got an album, you'd put the record on and you'd read the liner notes and see who the little names in small print were, and you wondered who those people were. And now that I've had the chance over the last 50 years to meet a lot of them, I consider myself in some pretty rare air. I've gotten to play with some of my heroes, and I've gotten to be on tape with some of my heroes.
How did you balance I guess obviously with the studio kind of job, you're planted somewhere versus touring, and did you have them going on and competing for your time?
A little bit. Back in the early days with Bonnie, we were gone a lot. And I think one of the great things about Muscle Shoals is I could come down here and make music, not be in a traffic jam. I mean, I jokingly say, I raised my kids in this town. I was a Little League coach for 8 years, I could get out of an Etta James session and be standing on third base in 10 minutes, coaching Little League. I couldn't do that in LA. I couldn't do that anywhere else. So Janet and I, we're going to have our 50th anniversary in June. I mean, it probably kept my family together, to be home more, to be more of a session guy than a live guy. I did a session with Lee Von Helm one day, cut tracks, and then sat and overdubbed. He gave me he's another one of my favorite days in the studio where he was playing mandolin and I was playing bottleneck, and he'd say things like, "I'll tell you what, Will, I'll take the intro, you take the first verse. After that, it's every man for himself," and stuff like that. And, "You woke me last night, you were talking in your sleep. Sounded like you're wondering if our love's gonna keep. Baby, can't you see? Ain't nobody loves you like me." Something I wrote that I thought I'd try to pitch Levon, and he passed before I got it to him. And I guess if I were to say anything, I'd say, if you got a dream out there and you got something you want to do, there are no guarantees. You might as well just go for it, because there are no guarantees for tomorrow. And I didn't get it to him before he passed, and I wanted to write something sort of bandish. And So I've been writing more, but I play about 1/10 as much, and you know. Just try to touch it sweetly and make sense these days.
Final thoughts here on the Muscle Shoals exhibit and the shows up there just a month or two ago.
That was great. I ran into Michael Gray, who works at the Hall of Fame up there, at a Dan Penn and Spooner show here in town, and we just were eating dinner together after the show, and Dan was there, and I played with Dan a lot, and it's one of the biggest compliments I've actually ever gotten is that he used Reggie for 55 years, and when Reggie passed, he called me to do some session work with him, and we become really good friends, and we're all eating dinner, and they said, this is what we're doing, we got this show, and we need a band, would you put a band together for us? So I put the band together, just called all the musicians, basically, and said, how'd you like to do this, and let's do it. And then they picked the artists, and the artists picked the tunes, and so it was like trying to find out what to do when, and pulling it all together and figuring out parking, and the next thing you know, your phone's blowing up, and where do I park, and what do I do? And you realize being a band leader is like herding cats. We pulled it off, you know, and we're very highly complimented and honored by them to do what they're doing right now, and to say, you know, there was a lot going on down here in Muscle Shoals, and let's chronicle it and let's pay homage to it. And so we're pretty honored by it.
I know I would die. Hey, in other words, I just couldn't.
Impressively, I also saw Jason Isbell on, I guess, the night before. He did like Better Move On, Wild Horses, and Kodachrome. But great interpreter of the classic rock canon.
Yeah, he grew up right up the road, you know. And matter of fact, it's interesting. Here we are at Single Lock. I think John Paul and Jason Isbell and Gary Nichols, they all grew up around here. They're all Grammy winners, and came out of little Green Hill, Alabama, just north of us here. And it's pretty remarkable that, you know, some people say the music's in the river, that it's a singing river. But I know one thing, that they grew up surrounded by people that didn't think it was weird if they wanted to be musical. And, you know, you can't always find that. You know, a lot of people, all my life, you know, and I'm the son of a naval officer, and it was like, I want to play music. Well, what are you going to get for a real job? You know, and down here you say, I want to play music. They go, oh, that's great. Do you know so-and-so? Do you know so-and-so? Because there's an open door down here. And there's a lot of community in it too. There are a lot, you know, our kids know each other. You know, the next generation knows each other. I mean, some of these guys like Gary Nichols or whatever, or my son, I coached in Little League, or I was out on the Little League field with. And so I've known them all their lives, and actually was instrumental. Jimmy asked me who I might recommend for the next generation coming up doing a session over on guitar, and I recommended Gary, and he did his first Muscle Shoals sound session on my recommendation to Jimmy. And so we've got a long history in each generation. And now Gary's son is a really excellent guitar player, and he's playing with his dad. My son is an excellent bass player, studio, you know, player. And so the next generation all knows each other too. And it's a community. It's not just, I don't know a diva in this town. I don't know anybody that would dissuade you from wanting to follow your dreams.
Well, that's a great thing. Well, I want to thank you, Will, for coming by Soul Country.
Well, it's my good pleasure. I appreciate being asked.
Soul Country number 13 is in the books, with special appreciation to Will, Single Lock Records, the Country Music Hall of Fame, and Reed Mathis for our theme song, We Ride. 13 was brought to you by Ace Production in conjunction with the Blues Center and with support from the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Foundation. Tune in again for more roots music, culture, and lore as Season 4 ropes in Grammy-winning bluesman Cedric Burnside, and find trailers, highlights, and playlists, as well as a full archive of episodes at soulcountry.com.